Hello everyone and welcome to today's Creative Access Masterclass, where we're going to be talking about mental health and well-being in the creative industries. So as we just wait for people to join, we'd really love to see who's here in the audience. So if you're able, do write your name in the chat. Let us know whereabouts you're dialing in from, whether you're an intern, a university student, whether you're doing a Kickstart placement. We'd love to know who's on the call, so let us know in the chat and we'll get started shortly. Hello, Lauren from London. Thanks for joining us. Can see we've got a few more joining, so for anyone that's just joined, do let us know who you are in the chat. Put your name, where you're joining from, what you do. Give about 20 more seconds or so and then I will get started and introduce our wonderful speakers. Hi, Jessica from UCA Canterbury, doing architecture. And we've got Niall from London, working for Film London. Lovely. Liana from UCA Epsom. Great, so a whole range. Kieran working at Soho House. Hi, Kieran. Right, brilliant. So I will get started because we have quite a lot to cover today. So thank you to everyone that's joining and welcome to anyone who's joining a Creative Access Masterclass for the very first time. We're really pleased to be presenting this masterclass focusing on the really important topic of mental health and well-being in the creative industries, which is timely because it's Mental Health Awareness Week this week. So to introduce myself, my name's Yasmin. I work as Programs Manager at Creative Access, as well as being one of the mental health first aiders on the team. I'm also a Creative Access alumni myself, having been placed into a role at the London Symphony Orchestra back in 2014, which seems like a long time ago now. But I'm pleased to be joined by two really brilliant speakers today. We've got Sam Bickley, who's a TV consultant, exec producer and welfare executive, and Camilla McInnes, who's a senior journalist at BBC News podcast. So I'm going to hand over to them very shortly to introduce themselves, but wanted to say thank you to those of you that have submitted questions in advance. We're going to do our best to cover as many of those as possible, but there'll also be a Q&A towards the end of today's session where you can submit questions for that. So in order to submit a question, you just need to use the Q&A function rather than the chat, and then you can upvote any questions that you particularly want to hear us answer. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to our panel to introduce themselves. I'll begin with Sam. Do you want to go first?
Oh, yes. Hello. Nice to meet you all, and thank you, Yasmin. My name is Sam Bickley. As you sort of get older in telly, you tend to have a sort of a long list of things that you do. That's what tends to happen. So I've worked in telly for many decades. I'm currently a freelance exec producer, but I will work in a bit of more of a portfolio space now, so a mixture of execing, consult execing, but also in the last couple of years I've started to work as a welfare exec on certain projects, and I'll talk a bit more about that later, but which is because it's a very exciting new introduction into the way that we all work in telly. Lovely to meet you all.
Thank you, Sam. Really looking forward to hearing a bit more about the welfare exec part of your role. And over to you, Camilla.
Hi everyone, my name's Camilla and I'm a senior journalist at the BBC, and my role at the moment is producing a podcast called If You Don't Know. It's commissioned by BBC Sounds and One Extra, and it's a weekly podcast and it's news and discussion and it's aimed at young Black people, and so my role as the senior journalist is to make lots of the editorial decisions, decide on the stories, tell the presenters what they can say and what they can't say. And it's a really, really enjoyable job. I've taken a bit of a break. My usual job is working in the radio newsroom at the BBC. And so that is reporting and producing the news across Radio 2, 3, 4, 5, Live and 6 Music. But I'm taking a bit of a break and I'm in podcasts. And just quickly just wanted to add, and I started at the BBC in 2018, and that was with Creative Access. They opened the door for me, and that was with Newsbeat, and I was a trainee multimedia journalist, and that was in 2018. Thanks for having me.
Amazing, thank you both. So a lot of people on today's call either been navigating their first job in the creative industries or maybe searching for a role. So I'd like to start by covering a few questions around that theme. So to begin, I'd love to hear how each of you prioritise your own well-being at work and whether you have any top tips. So maybe Camilla, would you like to go first?
Okay, so my top tips for prioritising your mental health at work would be, number one, communication is key. So, don't take on more than you can cope, which is something that is really easy to happen, especially within the creative industries. We're always working towards deadlines and things like that. And as you guys probably watching, probably new to the creative industries, it can be really tempting to just say yes to everything that the manager says. So, thinking about it and not taking on too much than you can cope. So for instance, saying to your manager instead, I can finish project A now and I can do project B tomorrow, instead of saying, yeah, I can do A and B. Another piece of advice I'd say is changing the scenery. I am a big advocate for taking breaks, taking walks. So every hour I probably do like a loop of the office, probably drives everyone mad, but it helps me. And it can improve the brain's capabilities and release endorphins, create new habits, like just seeing new spaces. And I'll tell you a quick story actually. And I think, well, I don't know, I might mention it later. No, I'll tell it now. One time when I was doing this, I'd taken a break. I actually did a BBC video on this. I took a walk outside of the office, basically to just have a breather, to have a bit of a cry, because I was really, really stressed. It was actually at the end of my Creative Access traineeship, and I'd gone for a few jobs, but I hadn't got one lined up. And so I just didn't know what I was going to do for the next year, or let alone the next few weeks. I was very, very stressed. So I went for a walk at the BBC, and I was outside the office, looked down on the floor, and there was a bunch of flowers. And there was a note attached saying, "These are a free gift for you. I hope you enjoy them." And I managed to find out who'd left the flowers, and it was this amazing lady who runs like a flower charity, saving and repurposing flowers. And it basically, I ended up doing a video on this, and it really makes me think about, obviously that's not going to happen on every break that you take, but just how taking that break benefited me. It meant that I was able to release myself, and I found something amazing at the same time. So that's my long-winded response there.
Yeah, 100% echo taking breaks. I'm a really big advocate for that. And Sam, did you have anything to add in terms of how you prioritize your own well-being at work?
Yeah, sure. That's a lovely story, by the way, Camilla. I think it's really lovely when people do things and sort of pay it forward. It sort of really resonates. So I'd piggyback that first of all with the walks. I'm quite a fidget, always have been, a bit of a fidget bum. So I think, and walking, science proves that helps the mind work. It helps to calm the mind. So taking breaks from your desk. One of the things that we've talked about before, actually, when we had this walking chat, when I talked a little bit with Camilla before this, I talked about actually that sometimes it's quite useful to have a kind of routine or a catch up with someone that's a walking one. So often when I also used to work at the BBC, I would actually have mini meetings and catch ups where you don't need to write anything, and we just do a loop, and we'd walk towards Regent's Park and back again. And I think you don't have to always be in a meeting to do that. And if you're someone who's just joined an organisation, again, taking yourself outside to think about your to-do list, to think about what, to breathe, to ground yourself, I really do recommend that. The other thing that I think it's quite useful is I quite like a visual to-do list for the day. Like I write my to-do list every day, especially since the pandemic, in order to sort of turn my home into a workplace on some days. And I write everything from 7 in the morning, self-care, a bit of meditation, walking my kid to the school bus, back at my desk for the first meeting at 9 o'clock, and I breaking for lunch, breaking for a walk. And I've just found that since lockdown, my trick has been to write my self-care down on my to-do list, not just my jobs and not just my meetings and not just my Zooms. And that really helps me to focus and almost tick off my self-care as well as an important job to do that day. So I think, piggybacking Camilla, those are two, and I'm sure I'll have a few more in the course of the hour.
Brilliant, thank you both. So we had quite a lot of questions about kind of dealing with heavy workload and avoiding burnout. And we all know that, you know, a heavy workload, long working hours, short deadlines can be features of many roles in the creative industry. So I wondered if you had any advice for anyone who's kind of feeling overwhelmed by their workload or wanting to avoid burnout. Either of you can jump in.
I'll jump in. I'd say for me, it's all about listening to your mind and your body. You can feel when the burnout's coming along. It doesn't just hit you. You can feel it from like a few days before, a week before, you know, you start to feel your motivation going downhill. Maybe you're not sleeping. So one of my pieces of advice when it comes to like managing burnouts and like heavy workload is, if you can, if you're on like a contract and that kind of thing, taking holiday every few months. I know a lot of people, especially during the pandemic, who've reached the end of the year, well, the end of like the holiday year, and they had loads of days left over of holiday. And I was like, you know what, fine, you couldn't go abroad, but you could still take that time off. I remember I made a mistake in my first year of working at the BBC. I would take holidays sporadically, like just take one day every here and then. And then I would return the next day and feel, if anything, even more stressed because I just hadn't taken enough time off. So for me, it's taking that leave that you are supposed to take it and just have a time out. I've even got one friend, he takes leave and schedules, just goes to the museum by himself. So, you know, having you time and taking a breather, taking a break is my advice for when you can feel the burnout coming on.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Camilla. And I think there are different ways. I think it's always got to find the self-care that suits your situation at the time. And I've certainly done what Camilla's done, especially in my sort of younger freelance life, or, you know, my younger days at the BBC. But I've slightly shifted a little bit in recent years, and that I've recognised that you need to also find the self-care in the day and the self-care in the week. And I used to do that thing, like loads of us working in telly, we just go for it. We see that production through and then we just flop into a holiday. But actually, that means you're still stressed and releasing all that cortisol and slightly, you know, hypervigilant in all the rest of the year till that holiday comes. So I've started to shift a bit and recognize that what I need to do, for me anyway, personally, is start to find those nuggets of self-care in the day, across the week. And actually, that example that Camilla used about nipping into a gallery, I've started doing that. Sometimes I look at my diary and I put that in, like a free museum en route to the meeting. Like I just, you know, just especially now we're back out in the world again. And it's been like really exciting to find those quiet moments in the museum. And it sounds mad, but I would genuinely wish I'd done that years ago. You know, don't wait to find the confidence. Do that now. You deserve that now. So really look at your diary, because I think self-care comes when we try to be a bit organized about it. So I think, you know, there's find the self-care in the day, find the self-care in the week, and find those things that are free that you can do and that you can build around your diary. Again, it's about integrating work with balance every day, every week. And the other thing, I think, coming back to almost to the first question, really, I think when I sort of prioritize and don't say yes to everything, and certainly your managers need to know what you're going to deliver when. Exactly as Camilla said, I can deliver A then, I can deliver B tomorrow. Start to grow that confidence, because you're not saying you're not doing it, you're just showing that you're prioritizing. And prioritizing and just doing those frontline things and not thinking you've got to do everything in that moment, that'll stop you getting so overwhelmed. So, you know, making those to-do lists, and there's you know, I think there's a lot of resources out there online, and many of you might do this already, but sort of crossing off your to-do list into sections, you know, urgent, very important, you know, miscellaneous, just break it up so you're always moving things onto that urgent list, but because they're genuinely urgent. And that'll also stop you thinking that the to-do list is just one long endless trail of things to do. And hopefully that would help a little bit.
Yeah, some great advice there. So kind of thinking less about people who are in work, but maybe people that are looking for jobs in creative industries. I know that job hunting can be really stressful, particularly if you feel like you're getting nowhere. I know I've had that experience before. So what would your advice be for anyone on the call who feels like job searching is having a negative impact on their mental health?
there's a couple of things. I think we should talk about this, you know, throughout the session. Actually, there's different ways of doing it. But because the way I am, I often find when I'm job hunting, especially in that freelance mode, that sitting in a cafe is really helpful. Like feeling like I've got almost that company, so that there's accountability when I try and focus on those letters that I know I've got to send out, and sort of feel like I've got some company. And then second to that, also think about your network and some of the buddies around you who might be also looking at work, and maybe go together, go to each other's places, go to cafes together, and sort of do a bit of that job hunting together. So you've got someone to bounce off, someone to encourage you. I'm a really big fan of utilising that sort of buddy system for a lot of these things. And often actually still to this day, often meet a friend and sit at the top of a cafe and both do a bit of work together. And we sort of encourage each other, because it is isolating. But I think going to a cafe or going to meet someone, it gives you a reason to get up. It gives you a reason to create a destination. And that's also really important, to know that you're not alone, that you're using really good healthy habits to get you out of the house and looking. So I think my big thing is that you sort of do need a companion, whether it's people you don't know in a cafe or whether it's a buddy. I think that really supports the sort of your mental health around the job hunt.
I completely agree with that, with the going to a cafe. It's that change of scenery. It's just, I mean, it can spark off something. It's so easy when you're inside in your home to just be distracted, to get distracted. I also enjoy, or when I have been applying for jobs, not that I enjoy applying for jobs, but going to like the park and working outside, like working in green spaces, really does actually, it really helps you. In terms of like applying for jobs as a whole, my piece of advice would be prioritizing. I think, Sam, you actually mentioned it earlier when you were talking about list making and prioritizing what's urgent and what's important. And so when you're looking at jobs, it can be easy sometimes to just apply for everything. But I think sometimes it's about quality, not quantity. And it can be very overwhelming when you're applying for loads and loads of jobs. I remember when I got out of uni to get my first job in journalism, which was a 6-week internship, I had to apply for 50 jobs. It was 50 something jobs because I'd written it down. I took a note of it, and that was exhausting. And looking back, I probably didn't need to have applied for so many. So prioritizing and doing it, applying in the park or in a cafe.
I would add a few other bits, because there's so much to say on this subject, obviously. The other thing to do is also use a bit of time to research jobs, research people, research people that you want to write to. Because when you do contact people, sometimes on spec, what they love, someone was talking about this in a meeting I was at Channel 5 today, that the fact that sometimes someone writes and says, oh, I love that program that you made. Look at the credits of programs if that's your area. That's, obviously lots of you are doing in different industries on this, but look at who's made stuff, look at who's commissioned things, look at who's curated that art exhibition. Research people, because there are other ways and other portals for which you can contact people. When you send that message to someone on LinkedIn, it's nice that you can tell them there's something of theirs that you've enjoyed. So also use that time, I think, in a job hunting to research the industry, because it's really important that in this, this stage, that you're still loving it, that you're still loving the place that you want to enter, that you've still got a genuine passion for it. So I think that's also really important. And the other thing that I used to do when I was younger was also maybe spend a bit of time writing your script, writing your paragraph, your script, who you are, what you're interested in, what you're passionate about, and attached to what Camilla's saying, if you've got a focused area, because you can write different letters for different types of jobs and different emails and apply for different things, but spend a bit of time also just working on your introductory paragraph script and show that to someone. Again, that might be your buddy, but it's really good that you sort of spend a bit of time prepping, and then when you're launching and you're off, you've spent a bit of time really thinking about what it is you're trying to say and who you are, who you're trying to sort of introduce yourself as.
Yeah. And just quickly, I want to add, and as well as researching the employer or the reach out to them as well. I've had a few people contact me about jobs going in my department, and I've done that as well when I have interviews, actually like contacting the person that posted the advert, and you find out things that you wouldn't know that would really help you. So that's something, don't be afraid to do that. within reason, of course.
So I think those are all brilliant answers, and I guess an element ties into some of the themes that came up around, building support networks and also the importance of networking in the creative industries. So one of the questions that was sent in advance was about navigating creative spaces and social settings if you have social anxiety. I wondered if you have had any thoughts on how people can approach networking if they struggle with that.
I don't know. Oh no, Sam,
sorry. That's a really good question, and I suppose it's very unique to each individual, actually. But so I'll try and have a think about how to answer that more generally. So apologies if it doesn't speak uniquely to you. I know it can be a bit frustrating in this world that suddenly we're being told about mindfulness and meditating and grounding ourselves, but those are really important things. And even with my many years of working in telly, I'm a bit of an introvert extrovert, actually. So even before doing this, I will sort of do a bit of universal breathing, which that's sort of the breathing that you can do to sort of fight or flight feelings, because they're real. We all feel them, and you can get in the habit of sometimes before you enter a space to sort of do that sort of holding your breath for 4 seconds and breathing out slowly and breathing in slowly. I think those sorts of things are really good. I also sometimes do use a bit of manifestation. And again, it might seem a bit like at this stage of your career, maybe that feels a bit too much, but genuinely, I find that I do that sort of, I do a bit of meditation, and I have this sort of little card that I've written some of the things I want to manifest this year, and I do repeat them every day, and sometimes the magic does happen. So I think it's really important to just sort of find quiet spaces to ground yourself. Remember that you're awesome. Remember that people want to meet you. Take time to breathe and ground, and sort of manifest the thing you want. And sometimes that's all those steps can lead you into a room slightly more grounded than you might have been 10 minutes before. And like I said, I know that it might feel to some of you a little bit sort of tricky, but I definitely find those things work. Again, walking, I think is the biggest tool that many of us have, or just being on the move, or getting out into nature before you enter spaces. I think for me, it's all about the things you do beforehand that really help you, and that also to remember, as I said, that people want talented people. They want to meet you. They hope they're going to meet someone out there with good ideas, the next big thing, the next great person. So don't sort of go into those spaces also feeling that you're not wanted. And the other thing to remember is also social anxiety. So many people in that room are also experiencing it. You're not on your own. Whatever stage we're at in our various industries, we're all prepared to walk into that room in various ways. And so if you start to have a conversation with someone you feel comfortable with, I think it's so fine to let them know you're feeling a bit nervous. These are new experiences, and you will find someone for whom you've got commonality with. So hopefully I've answered that okay. But there's lots of different unique ways that you can really handle that.
I completely agree, Sam. I like your point you said lots of points, but the thing that stood out for me was being prepared, basically, and planning in advance. I'm quite open about my mental health, and I've suffered and still do suffer with depression for like the last 10 years. And as part of that, when I'm going through an episode, I do get quite anxious, especially in creative spaces, which can be quite loud, or social settings. And so when I'm going through a bad period like that, I like to plan as much as I can if I have like the energy and the capacity to do it. So thinking of conversation starters in advance that is nothing to do with the weather. Maybe even like what you said earlier, Sam, doing a bit of research beforehand of who's going to be there. Let's say if it's like an event, so finding out if the person that's leading it, or people that are going to be there, if they've released a documentary or a podcast or a piece of art or something like that, so you just know that you can talk to them about it. If you're finding it really, really hard, and that's something that I struggle with, which is when I'm feeling low or feeling like anxious, which is just having the motivation to even go, I like to say to myself, just go for an hour. Just go for an hour. At least you're going, and then when the hour's up, just leave. Or sometimes you end up having a good time, and then you end up staying longer than an hour. Love when that happens. Or if the social anxiety is particularly bad that day, then, you know, really do weigh it up and think, do I actually need to go? That is also another option, because like what you said earlier, Sam, you don't have to say yes to everything.
No, that's right, you don't, you really don't. And it can be really hard with sort of this sort of FOMO heavy world to think that's okay, but there's always another event, there's always another opportunity. And the other thing is also, you know, if you know who's going to that event and you don't feel great and actually feel a bit overwhelmed, just that's not an opportunity to write to somebody that you knew that you had hoped to meet at the event, and drop them a line. I'm really sorry I wasn't able to make this, but and I'd missed the opportunity to meet you, but blah blah blah. You know, there's portals by which you can always fill. You know, if you're not going to the event, you can send an email. You know, if you can't send an email, you know, there's something else that you can do. There's always something you can do. So don't think not going to something is the end of your career, because there's always an event. And actually, you'll soon get to a stage like me where you're privileged enough to sort of go, oh my God, I don't think I can go to another thing at Grosvenor House. And that is a lovely place to be, but it doesn't mean you still don't feel that anxiety. And I think it's important. I think what's great about Camilla and myself being at different stages of our careers and different ages is that there's still a universality around the way we both feel. You know, it doesn't go away. It's just that I might have had more practice in the tools and the skills I need to help support me. You know, I'm sort of older now, and I'm navigating my industry with the menopause, for instance. So that brings a whole nother spell of anxiety that's swept in, you know, a new stage. So again, I'm trying to find new ways to manage those things. So it never really goes away. You never stop needing tools and skills. But I am using some of those ones I've mentioned from years ago, for when I was younger. They sort of travel with you, and you just keep adapting them. And I think that's really, really important. It's what's right for you. What do you enjoy? What do you want to do? I think that's it, actually, in that area.
Yeah, I think there's some really good pieces of advice in there from both of you. And Camilla, you alluded to it just then, but you've been open about dealing with depression, and did a really great video piece about how kindness can help save lives. I wondered if you'd be happy to talk a bit more about how you've managed to deal with your depression or manage it whilst in the workplace.
Oh yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. It's been hard at times. It's been tough, especially in the creative industries where life can just be so competitive, and so it seems like you always have to be on your A game, but that's not necessarily the case, because no one can be on their A game all the time. In terms of like when I first started at the BBC, I remember I wanted to keep it a secret. Because I was so embarrassed. My mum, who I love so much, she's a little bit old school, so like you know, it's still a bit taboo, particularly in like the Black community. So she was like, don't tell your boss about it, you'll never get a job. And I was like, oh no. But it got to a point where I literally was having a meltdown in the office, so I was forced to tell my editor, and I don't want other people to be in that. I wouldn't want anyone to be in that situation. So now moving forward, I always tell my bosses. So hopefully they have been really understanding, I think, because mental health is talked about a lot more. So in this most recent job that I started in March, I didn't tell her like on the first day. It was more just like in like a gradual conversation in like the first few weeks. I said to her, oh, by the way, sometimes I do struggle, blah, 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 but, you know, the BBC's been very supportive, and I understand that this team will be as well. And so I think, yeah, being upfront about it, that's what's helped me. But also what I want to add, something that has helped me with like my mental health, just in general and in working, is, it sounds so cringy, but the power of kindness. Like, my video that I did was called Kindness Can Save Lives. And I won't tell you too much about what it's about, because I'd like you to go and watch it. But I'm definitely a big kindness advocate, and I'll give you some examples. I feel like most of the jobs that I've got have come from being kind. So my first job that I got, where I was on contract at the BBC after working at Newsbeat, after I finished my Creative Access year of my traineeship, was with BBC Voice. That's what the department was called, and it was presenting the Amazon Alexa news. And I don't think I've actually really told many people about this. I got that job because a lovely young journalist came to Newsbeat and presented some of the segments. She did her own package, and at the end we have feedback. And I think because she was new and no one really knew her, nobody really said much. But I noticed that no one really said anything. So after they had done the feedback, I added, oh, by the way, I really liked that package. I thought you did it in a really good way, because I did. That's what I genuinely did think. And then she came up to me after the meeting and said, oh, thanks so much for saying that. By the way, there's a new department launching, and I think you'd be perfect for it. You should contact this lady. Contacted her. Obviously, I had to go through like the interview process, and I got a job. And that's how I got my first job properly at the BBC. And that wouldn't have happened had I not been kind. So that's something that I recommend. And it's nice to be kind. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all that. It's such a good point. And I know a lot of those entry-level jobs are, you know, people being assistants, being runners, being interns in different creative industry sort of spaces and offices. But actually, when you're in those jobs, that often means that you're sometimes in the tea and coffee making business. You know, you're nipping out, doing kind things for stressed out senior creatives. That's often a lot of people's entry level space in. But that's exactly what Camilla's saying. Is that it's, you know, those stressed out senior creatives who you're bringing a cup of tea to, checking if they need anything, showing real empathy and insight. That is how you start to make that bond and connection with that person who does remember you for that job. That's exactly how it happened for me coming through telly, and it's exactly how lots of people I've got to know and given breaks to. It started with a conversation of someone saying, "Was there something I needed?" and recognizing, you know, that person that everyone's depending on also still needing something. So I think it's a really good example, Camilla. You know, it's kindness is a bonding. It's a chain of bonding, especially in the creative industries. And it's how people remember you. It's like your kindness is your calling card if you're smart.
100%. And Sam, one of your many hats is that you're a welfare executive. So I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about what that means, what that involves.
Sure. I mean, I've been like many people, you know, working through this industry and dealing with many sort of kind of stresses and biases. I've always been you know, sort of like campaigning for the way that sort of, you know, crews and production people are treated, but also duty of care around contributors. And what's often happened is that's been down to the freelance producer who's now leaving the production to sort of keep in touch with contributors when they can. And obviously in the last couple of years, especially since some of the incidents that have happened, you know, sort of Love Island, Jeremy Kyle, etc., there's Ofcom have introduced a new code, a welfare code. And that means that lots of production, especially around the sort of fact and end space, but actually it's really feeding through into everything, need to have welfare producers on their productions, following protocols and being there as an advocate, not for the production, but for the contributors. So you are working with the production, but you are an advocate for the needs of the contributor. And the most important stage of that sort of care also is the aftercare. It's been on many of the protocols, the series that I've worked on, you're around for 6 months after, that there's an aftercare plan for contributors. So they're not just abruptly dropped, there's an easing out. And then of course, that's starting to enter the space that's, you know, really advocating for production staff and crews. And it's happening across the creative industries. But this code now really means that there's a real implementation and a budget line for care of our contributors in our programs.
That's really great to hear. And I guess it kind of ties into my next question, which is, do you both think it's easier now than it was earlier in your career to talk about mental health and well-being?
Well, my career started marginally much earlier than Camilla's. So yeah, you know, I was in, you know, 80s, 90s. There's just no boundaries. Not even some employment laws in place, you know, when I started out in telly. And even up until recently, I think it's been very hard for lots of us to share. And I have taken, you know, admire lots about the sort of younger generation who are articulate about mental health. And it's meant that sort of a lot of people in the creative industries like myself have also been able to follow their lead. I've probably been able to be even more articulate because of the bravery of a lot younger people and a lot of entry-level people into the creative industries. It's often your bravery that's allowed me and lots of women, and are probably now talking about the menopause now in the public space, probably because all those young people that have come into the industries and talked about their mental health. It's a sort of collaboration, really.
I want to, I mean, yeah, I started working in 2017, 2018. But even since then, I have seen a positive change. It's not where it should be and where it needs to be. But, you know, like I told you the story earlier of my mum saying, don't tell them about your depression, you won't get a job. I don't think she'd say that now. And I think that's just because there's been more awareness about it, and there's been more conversations. And so I'm now in a comfortable position that I am obviously an advocate for taking holiday as well, where I will say to my boss, I'm not feeling too great at the moment. I think I'm on the verge of a depressive episode. I'm gonna need some time and need to take some time off. So I do think things are getting better, but also, you know, you can try and change that culture as well. I'm trying to at my work. I'm part of a group, and we're actually trying to change like the culture within the newsroom in particular when it comes to mental health, because one of the hardest things can be when you're feeling anxious or depressed or something like that, and you have to call in to work to say that you can't make it. I still really struggle with that, and I'm thinking up excuses. I'm like, oh God, is it diarrhea? No, is it tummy ache? And you should be able to just be honest. And so one of the things that we're trying to implement is come up with a way where if you are having like a mental health crisis, you can get someone else to call up on your behalf, like some kind of like easier way of doing that, because that's something that it's really, really difficult. It can make you feel worse. It can make you feel worse. I remember once I called up when I was having a bit of a crisis a few years ago, and I said, I just don't know if I'm in the right headspace. And they said, well, are you coming in or not? And I was like, wow, I feel terrible now. It just made me feel worse. And so, yeah, so you can try and change it as well.
Yeah, I've not heard of that before, but I think that's a great idea. And I do echo that. Like, I've definitely seen a change myself since the pandemic. I think organizations are a lot more aware of, you know, being care and how mental health and well-being impacts their staff. So I'm seeing a positive change, but there's still work to do, and we'll have a few tips later on how people can affect change within their organizations or personally. But we did have a few questions from freelancers in advance, so I'm going to put those to you, Sam. The first question is, how do you navigate mental health, motivation and freelancing?
Goodness, that's a big one. Mental health, motivation and freelancing. Well, I think first of all, some of the tips we've talked about earlier, I think should definitely be included as a response to that question. What we've talked about in terms of, you know, bodies, self-care, diarising those things in your to-do list. Again, I do think getting to, like Camilla, you mentioned getting together in a group. I do think getting together with other people to work with, to have in your network, to have in your WhatsApp group is really, really important. It's almost a bit like dieting. It works better when you have a buddy. And I sort of think it's the same thing about freelance. I certainly don't think I would have got through or sustained being in telly, for instance, for as long as I have without my network. So I think establishing your network of people, and that's the great thing about the creative industries. They're just amazing, creative, lovely people to get to know. You know, whatever's going on for you as an individual, there is often just lovely people to meet. So I sort of think gather your network, the sort of creative family you choose, have certainly supported me. And still, you know, I met up with a friend I've sort of worked with as a researcher 30 or something more years ago, you know. So I think developing a network and being willing to sort of ask for help is really, really important. Can you just tell me about another section of the question? So I know it's come in 3 parts. Can you just remind me?
How do you navigate mental health, motivation and freelancing?
So there are a lot of resources now that you know, because of things like Coalition for Change, the Whole Picture Project toolkits with the Film and TV charity, Dignity at Work, coming through lots of organisations. An extraordinary amount of resources out there that weren't before. And I'd say also, pick up the phone and navigate those and speak to someone. Do not be on your own with this. A lot of you aren't necessarily in the jobs yet, you're entry level. And so I think ringing out those resources and stuff to become familiar with them and familiar what support is out there, I think is also really important. Because it's almost like you're going to, if you go move somewhere, you check where the hospital is and you check where the doctors are. So I think if you're interested in industry, check what the resources are and what the skills are. I think that's also really, really important.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. I want to echo what you said, Sam, about self-care. That's really important. Yeah, with the mental health, motivation, and freelancing, make sure you're balancing and putting in some self-care to yourself. And that doesn't mean, going to the hairdressers or getting your nails done. It's doing things that bring you joy. So taking a time out, or for instance, me, I love music. I love live music. And I know that seeing live music, I'm going to be invigorated afterwards, and it's going to make me really, really happy. And that is something that helps me with my motivation. So doing things that make you feel good personally is always good for your mental health, and you should be fitting in times to do that alongside freelancing and working. I'm trying to think, what's another piece of advice I give? Maybe come back to me.
I do think that's absolutely right, Camilla. I do think your hobbies, your life beyond telly, or whatever the creative industries here that you're representing, is something to not make number two. It's equal. It really, really is. And there's times, of course, when we work in these industries that we sort of douse that. We don't see our friends for weeks. We've hit a deadline. But I think it's really, really important to sort of respect the sort of the family that you choose. As I said before, it's going to travel with you. And so think about the hobbies and things you can be doing that you love. Think about other things you're passionate about. If you just put everything you're passionate about into that job hunt, that's going to sort of break you down, actually. And that will also impact your mental health, because you're setting a really high bar for yourself. It's much more important to set a high bar for yourself as a sort of rounded human being than just a sort of a crazy ass successful person. You've got to be rounded, and that's also, I think, an important ambition. And if you remember that, that will lead to success, because you're not putting that much pressure on yourself and ultimately on your mental health.
I remember the point that I was going to say. It's come back to me. So basically, I'm reading a book at the moment. It's really good. It's called Feeling Good, and it's by this psychotherapist called David Burns, and it's all about motivating yourself when you're depressed. And one of the things that I learned from it, which I want to share with everyone here, is turning those kind of like negative thoughts in your head, which you can get with like when you're overworked and when you're freelancing and stuff, which is, I need to do this, I have to do this. Changing those thoughts can help you with your motivation. So changing it to, I want to do this, I want to do this. So yesterday I had a really long day of work, and afterwards I had to record something. Well, I didn't have to record something, I wanted to record something. And I remember thinking, oh God, I don't want to do this. I feel really, really tired. And then I actually sat back and thought, no, you want to do this. It's going to help you in your career and you enjoy doing it. Just do it. And so obviously it depends what kind of like state you're in. But if you are able to do it, then just try and do it. And so that's my thing. And it really does actually, it helps, just that positive thinking.
I was also just going to add to that, because one of the things I'm also doing counselling training. So some of the things I do with some of my clients is really encourage them to do quite a lot of journaling. I think certainly this sort of, many of you I'm sure on here will be doing that already. But again, journaling is about your voice and you being a sort of companion to yourself, actually. And I sort of think having that notebook is also a real support. It certainly was for me. And I know there's a lot of technology out there now, but being able to sort of write things down at night and sort of slightly unload a lot of those worries. I know a lot of people recommend that, but it really can work. And if you wake up in the middle of the night with a spiraling thought, write it down, put it away, and sort of it can help shut it down, can shut down those sort of negative thoughts that are whirring around there.
Brilliant, some great tips there. I think we'll have one more question before we move on to the audience questions. We've had quite a lot about what people can do for themselves, but I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts on how people can advocate for mental health and wellbeing support within their organisations if they feel there's area for improvement where they're working?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it was, for instance, I wanted to make some real change, and so that's why me and some colleagues formed this group where we could, we bring in some of like the big higher up like managers, and they come to some of our sessions and we give them advice, which was, things about the calling up when you're calling in sick, getting someone to do it on your behalf. So can you repeat the question again? Because I'm, yeah.
That's fine. The question was, how can people advocate for mental health and wellbeing support within their organisations if they feel there are areas for improvement?
Yeah. So mine would be, again, starting that group if you can, or messaging your manager about it. If you really do see changes and you think you've got an answer to them, be proactive. You could even, the BBC has a really good employee assistance program. You can even call them up and get advice. I call them up and sometimes offload my problems. So I think it's you can be proactive if you have the energy to do it.
Yeah, we really are in a climate of initiatives such as I've never seen before, which is really exciting. So more often than not, the place that you're working in will be signing up to, and if they haven't, go towards the film and TV charity, look at the whole picture program toolkit. There's been a lot of work done by lots of people over the last year and a half, 18 months, 2 years, talking to freelancers, talking to the industry, finding out what the needs are of people. And that's again across as a template for across the creative industries, and have a look at those yourself. You'll sort of realize that there's been a lot of work done, and you'll find that there's a lot of people to talk to that are kind of highlighted by those initiatives as well. We're in unprecedented times where mental health is being discussed, is being resourced, and people are willing to listen. So I think they're willing to listen. So feel comfortable, and if you're with a manager that hasn't caught up, then again, that's where those resources are helpful to sort of navigate those managers towards, actually, because often they need advice. There's a lack. They've worked in a certain way for many years and haven't recognised that there are tools out there now to make for much better working practices that support everybody. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, and I think people should be confident in the fact that they do have the ability to make some change within their organisation. So talking about Creative Access, for example, we have a wellbeing working group that's comprised of some of our staff, and through that we've advocated for all employees to complete a wellness action plan within 3 months of starting, which is reviewed on a yearly basis. So that's really encouraging people to talk with their line managers about the best working styles for them. We also incorporate monthly wellbeing activities into our team meetings, which is a really nice way to get to know each other a bit more. And we also have 2 trained mental health first aiders on the team, which means there's just someone within the team that people can go to if they're struggling at all. So we'll have some tips at the end of today's session, but those are a few kind of small actions that you could potentially advocate for within your organizations if those things aren't happening already.
And that's a good point, Yasmin. And just because you mentioned mental health first aiders, there are quite a lot of those being identified within companies, sort of the welfare leads in companies. When you do join somewhere, that's really, really important to you, and no one's told you in terms of your contracting package who those people are, ask that question. It's totally legitimate now. Do you have someone that's a welfare or a mental health representative within the company? I think that's totally appropriate.
Yeah, no, because we have mental health first aiders. In fact, I think we have a couple on every floor, and they make me feel more warm when I'm around them, because I have spoken to them, but I didn't actually know who they were, and it was my manager that sent an email around saying, these are the mental health first aiders, you can go to them if you have any issues, and I was really glad that my manager did that. And so yes, that's something that you can definitely look into in your companies for the audience.
Brilliant. So I'm going to move us on to audience Q&A now, because I can see we've got quite a few questions popped up. So there's one specifically for you, Camilla, from Amanda. She says, the story you told earlier about being in the office at the start of your career and feeling overwhelmed, how do you ensure going forward that you're able to remain as confident as you are and able to thrive in the workplace if your mental health is still a work in progress, essentially?
Yeah, well, we're all works of progress, all works in progress, aren't we? And so I think it's listening to myself and learning from myself. When I have like a depressive episode now, in comparison to when I first got depression when I was like 17, 18, I was terrible at handling it. I'm a lot better at handling it now. And that's come with experience. So I've had lots of counselling over the years, so I highly recommend counselling, and that's helped me. I'm reading that book, Feeling Good, which comes up with like short-term and long-term techniques that you can implement. So one of them is, you know, changing those negative thoughts that come into my head and saying, actually, no, you do want to do this, or if I'm struggling to get out of bed, I will say to myself, what is the purpose of staying in bed today? You've had your 8 hours of sleep. If you can get up, you will feel better. So really trying to motivate myself. If I am feeling anxious, I also like to do like physical like grounding techniques. There's the 4-7-8 breathing technique, which I recommend, which is quite good for when you're having anxiety that's quite acute and hitting you there and then. So you basically breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for 7, and then breathe out for 8. So that's the 4-7-8 technique. And that actually helps me before I have like a big meeting or something like that. So it's a work in progress, but like I said, I can often feel it coming on. And if it is coming on, then I will maybe say to my team or my manager, I'm going to take some holiday soon because I need to. So it's about listening to yourself, listening to your mind, listening to your body, because when you start burning out, you get really tired. You start getting ill as well. It's really weird, like the physical side effects that can come with burnout. So, you know, when you're looking in the mirror thinking, why have I had this cold for 2 weeks? You know that you're getting into the burnout stage. So it's always just noticing those signs and responding to them and giving your body what it needs.
Great, I think that's great. Do you have anything to add, Sam, to that?
I was going to say, obviously the approach often to deadlines and busy times in the creative world is obviously, it used to be just, you know, going out, going for it, drinking, partying, crashing, meeting those deadlines. But I do think sometimes when you know you're hitting a real intense period, that's I've certainly noticed with my mental health, that's the time that I pause on lots of recreational habits. I sort of do that a lot more kind of replenishment and nourishment. I eat good foods. It sounds a bit sort of a bit of a swatty pants, but actually, you know, if you're going up against an intense period with nourishing, mellow things, it really can help you. It can help you get through those periods. And because of how I've had to manage my mental health, that's what tends to happen to me now. I can feel the stress coming, so I go up against it with sort of really utilizing those good habits, and then I come out the other side. Actually, it can be really helpful.
Absolutely, I completely agree with that. You know, they say to eat your 5 a day for a reason. It's not just made up. and it does make you feel good, even though I don't get it every day, but it does help. It helps. And exercise as well. Exercise.
Yeah, that's a big one for me. I feel like having a routine which incorporates exercise really is good for me when I'm feeling stressed at work, or if I'm just feeling a bit overwhelmed by things generally. So I can echo that. I see in the Q&A that we've got a couple of questions around networking. So I will kind of cover both of those in one. So Famida has asked how to start networking. I don't have many connections and find it hard to sustain.
Yeah, I can go for that. Lots of people network with me just on like social media. So that's quite a good one. Like, let's say you're working from home and are lacking in those social connections. I have like friends that I've made in the industry that I've never even met before. And I met them on Twitter, and I've met them on Instagram. And when we have met in real life, it's been really fantastic. And I have people who I will have like full-on conversations with, like in like Instagram stories, responding to like a news piece that they've done or something creative. And that's something that I like to facilitate, even though social media can be very draining sometimes. It works really well in cases like that. So yeah, social media is a good place for networking. I think you're going to say something, Sam. Oh, and Sam, also, I just want to add, it's pronounced Camila. Just wanted to add that.
Sorry, apologies.
That's all right.
I think that it's, yeah, I think I mentioned earlier, you know, researching people and paying them compliments and then reaching out to them. It can really work. It's important not to overuse it, but that's how a lot of people have been met, or I've met people. I think that's really, really important. I also think every situation is a networking situation, pretty much, and sometimes you might not recognize that. Events are going to start being in person more and more. And someone's told me, always go to an event or a meeting or something, and always leave with at least one number. So you can sort of play a game with yourself, challenge yourself, not stress yourself, but just sort of have a bit of fun with it. I'm going to leave this room with a number. I don't know whose it's going to be, but I'm going to do it. And I would sometimes set myself those kind of tasks. I think, I must admit, till I became freelance again, I hadn't been on my LinkedIn much. And then when I first turned it back on again, I was like, there was all these messages from people. And I really have found it in the last couple of years, a really useful resource, again, to sort of connect to people, follow people, observe people as well, people that you look up to that seem to be a template for how you want to be, what you want to do. Sometimes you don't know what it is you want to do, and sometimes you see someone else doing it and then you recognize, and that helps you focus then, and then contacting that person then feels really relevant. We're all on here. The biggest tool for networking, I think, is mentorship. Having your address book and your network book ready with you when you're in those spaces and meeting people. I think that's also really important. It's okay to sometimes not be introduced to someone you've been in a space with or a meeting with, and then contact them at a later moment. They would have been where you're at, and they'll appreciate it.
Just to add on to what you both said, the way that I increased my network when I was kind of starting out my career in the arts was by going to networking events. So I found a group called Young People in the Arts, which is a volunteer-run organisation that put on networking events for people kind of at the start of their careers in the arts. And I went along to those. It was usually kind of at a pub or over drinks, and just met people working across a range of organisations. And the good thing about those events was that, because they're for networking, there's always someone to speak to, or members of the committee will chat to you if you look like you're kind of struggling to start a conversation. So I'd recommend kind of looking to see if there's any kind of networking groups or events happening within the industry that you're working in. So I will move on to another question. And yeah, Camila, you were talking about how you've been able to network through social media, and Shakira has asked a question: is it possible to break into the creative industries without a social media presence, or is a following essential / helpful to breaking in?
That is a really tough question, that is actually. I think if you don't have like a social media page, or social media platforms, it's always helpful to have I actually don't have this, but you should have like a biography kind of page, so that if someone like searches for you, they can then see the work that you've done, because that's something that's, if you're applying for a job, that's what the hiring manager is going to do when they see your CV. So I don't think it's not necessarily about, being Instagram famous or on TikTok or whatever, but I don't know. I think that having some kind of presence so people can see maybe some of your work is helpful. So if you are, completely against social media, then maybe having a page where you can promote your stuff on, or even like a LinkedIn, because
yeah, I was going to say that LinkedIn,
yeah,
and even I hadn't looked at mine for years, but it was there, it was established, it had my CV up on there, and I think that's really important.
People are being interesting nowadays. I went to a party recently and someone said to me, "So do you have LinkedIn?" And I was really shocked. I was really shocked. That's becoming like the new social media thing. Yeah, I don't have like a 100% answer for that one, because I think most people that I know working in the creative industries do have some kind of social platform, but you don't have to like be a celebrity on it. I think just having something with your work on the internet so that employers can see, but no pressure, no pressure.
Yeah, I mean, there was no social media around when I got in. I don't think social media gets you in, actually. I think it's, yes, it's useful to have, LinkedIn's useful because it's almost like a business like site, isn't it? And having your CV up on it, it operates in a very different way. But I don't think you need to have Facebook and Instagram to break in. But the one thing I think, again, I'll come back to, what you do need is, you'd be surprised how many people don't know the industry they're interested in. They're not watching, reading stuff, buying the magazines, exploring. I mean, all of you guys are turning up to things like this. I think it's really, really important. So I think you've got to sort of dip your toe in and really know the world yourself, actually. But actually having a social media profile, that can come much later. That's not necessarily going to get you in.
Yeah, I certainly didn't have a social media presence when I kind of entered into the industry. But as Sam said, I did use Twitter to follow companies I was interested in. So as I was in classical music, I'd follow all the orchestras, opera houses, just so I could see what they were programming and, what kind of content they were putting out. And it's a good way to prep for interviews as well, because then you can immediately say who you follow and what they're up to. So we have a couple more questions, and one is about knowing the difference between a long day and high capacity workload and it affecting your mental health. So how would you approach conversations about that, and how do you tell the difference? So how do you tell the difference between a long day and a high capacity workload?
Well, I guess if it's undoable, if you can't fit in all of the tasks, then that's way too much work. I think I alluded to it earlier, or spoke about it earlier, which is, having an honest chat with your boss and saying, I can do project A now, but I will have to do project B tomorrow. It's not possible. Or if you don't have that kind of relationship, or your boss is a bit unreasonable, then doing what Sam suggested earlier, which is list writing. So really like making a plan of how you're going to do things hour by hour. I like to do that, especially when it's like my day off and I'm taking on like an extra piece of work or something like that. Or if it is really, really tough, breaking things down into chunks. I like to do that as well. And I'll add that to my list, like really, really detailed. But let's say it's like writing a letter, I will write the letter outline, research the blah, 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 and it just makes everything so much easier. But obviously, if it's impossible to do, if you can't fit it all in, then that is just far too much work. But do all that you can to make it easier for yourself by breaking it down. Definitely.
I think you've got to start to learn to gradually get the confidence to control your day, decide what your day looks like. I know I've talked about sort of, doing mindfulness and grounding and starting your day with a bit of meditation, 5 minutes, even at the sink, washing up a cup, breathe, taking that time. It can literally give you the energy for the next couple of hours. And it becomes a habit. You do something for 20 times, it becomes a habit, it becomes something that's part of your DNA. And I think that is really important. It's about how you start your day, what fuel you give yourself, what you nourish yourself with, what rituals you do before you start the day can often affect you not feeling so overloaded and overwhelmed. And the other thing is, I think it's really important in the creative industries to take a deep breath and decide what time you're finishing. It takes a while. It's hard to do that when you first start out, but you can also practice that. You can practice walking out of offices and jobs. You can practice closing your laptop down. Set alarms, put it in your diary when you're going to finish. I'm going to finish at 6:15, I'm going to go for a walk. Put it in your brain loves prompts like that. And I've learned more and more that I wish I'd those tools that I used like that now that I wish I'd used earlier. So start now. You're just getting into good habits. And because the culture of work is learning to listen more, people will appreciate when you say, actually, my boundary today is that I need to finish at 6 this week, and we'll get everything done. But I for my mental health, I need to finish at that time, and that should absolutely be appropriate. Control how your day looks yourself.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. And I think it should always be kind of open dialogue with your line manager or another trusted colleague in your team. So I'm going to move us on to the final question, which is quite a big one. So we'll see how much we can cover it. But how can workplaces ensure there is long-term sustainable support with mental health in the workplace alongside smaller team actions / training and group activities? Do you have any thoughts on that? So how can workplaces ensure there's long-term sustainable support with mental health?
Well, I think, as I mentioned earlier, that there's active initiatives right now, unprecedented, but really, happening. I mean, I really do advise going onto the Film and Television Charity site and looking at the whole picture program toolkit. I do advise looking at the, who's signed up to the Coalition for Change. Obviously, we're talking to lots of industries here, but all the main industries have been putting out their sort of dignity at work initiatives and resources. So I'd say in the first instance, look to those. And normally 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, dispatching you to go and look at those resources might have just felt like a bit piecemeal, but they've really been, there's been a lot of work, research, a lot of working parties, a lot of working groups that have been really applying themselves to this. So it's a really good time to check those out because they're fresh and they're new and they're relevant to you. And all the organisations have signed up to them, and if they haven't, then navigate them to those spaces.
Yeah. Sam knows more about this than me, definitely, but I would just suggest talking to your colleagues and finding out if there's any groups like what I'm part of, like the Heads Up group, because obviously what we're trying to do, we're trying to change the culture, which is like a long-term thing. So this isn't just like a 5-minute WhatsApp group. So find out if there's any groups like that, and maybe you could join, or call up. If you're a journalist like me, I would speak to like the NUJ and find out if there's any schemes or anything. You can always read about it as well. All like workplaces have like their schemes and initiatives written down somewhere, so you can also investigate it and find out as well.
Yeah, and I'd recommend checking whether your organisation has a mental health policy. Lots do now. You might want to advocate for your employer to do some training. Creative Access offer employer training, so you can check that out on our website, or find some training for yourself and see if there's budget to cover that, or for your company to cover that. Yeah, so quite a lot of things that I think workplaces can be doing to support mental health in the workplace. And I think definitely there's, my experience working with employers is that there's much more open conversations about that. So now is a good time to talk about it within your workplaces and really advocate, become an advocate for mental health within your organisation. All right, I think that is all the questions. So we'll end with a bit of wrap up, and I know we've got some slides with signposting on them. So yes, those are just popping up now. So we just wrapped up some top tips from Creative Access for anyone that wants to take some small actions in their own workplace, and we'll send these around also after today's session. So the first thing is to complete a wellness action plan with your line manager to discuss the working style that benefits you most and anything that could hinder you in the workplace. Mind have some really good templates for wellness action plans, so check those out. And yeah, I'd recommend doing one with your line manager. Our second tip is to get involved with or develop a workplace group or project around mental health. So kind of tying into what Camila was saying about how there's a working group at BBC who deal with things like that. If you don't already have one in your workplace, can you set one up? Are there other like-minded colleagues who'd be willing to work with you on that? Our third tip is to incorporate wellbeing activities into team meetings from time to time. So at Creative Access, we have wellbeing activities on a monthly basis, and it's decided by staff in the team. So it can be anything from sharing your favorite park or favorite bit of nature, or we've done a portrait activity where we all drew each other. It can be anything, just something to kind of de-stress, I suppose. Our fourth tip is to check out our Navigating Disclosure article for tips on how to disclose an invisible condition at work, including mental health difficulties. Camila gave some great tips about how she's been able to speak with her employers about that, and it's ultimately your choice, but there are benefits to being open, and if you're unsure how to navigate that, then check out that article. And then our final tip is to reach out to a mental health first aider, trusted colleague, or Creative Access for support if you feel that's needed. And then on the next slide, we have some places you can go to for support if needed. There's a whole range of different organisations out there, from Mind to Rethink to Samaritan. So we'd always encourage everyone to seek support if needed. And then the final thing to do is to highlight our next masterclass, which is coming up on the 5th of July, I believe. Yes, Tuesday, 5th of July, and it's in person. So we're moving away from Zoom, getting back to in-person masterclasses. So details will be released soon, but we'll be at the National Theatre. We'll have a great panel of theatre professionals talking about a whole range of things in terms of careers within that sector. So save the date now, look out for further details, and yeah, excited to get to actually see some people in person. So I guess that just leaves me to say a big thank you to Sam and Camilla for all your insights today. It's been great having you, and I hope you've enjoyed it.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's been great. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone who's joined today. I hope you found it useful, and thank you to the team behind the scenes for all your help. And yeah, hope you can join again for our next masterclass on 5th of July.